Good morning, everyone. I'm Giannis Mandalidis, manager at CNN Greece, and I have the privilege of being the moderator for the online session entitled UK-Europe Union post-Brexit at the Delphi Economic Forum. Taking this opportunity, I would like to introduce our distinguished guests, Her Majesty's Ambassador to Greece, Kate Smith, participating from here in Athens, and a sincere friend of Greece. And from London, the Right Honourable Lord Francis Maude, an experienced politician, ex-government minister, and currently founder of FMA, a consulting organization specializing in government efficiency and reform around the world. Since our time is quite tight, our time schedule is quite tight, let me first ask Mrs. Ambassador. The negotiations on the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union came to an abrupt halt to stop due to the coronavirus outbreak. Can you inform us about the point the negotiations reached? Are you worried about the time for transition period that is not enough, and an extension maybe it is necessary? What will happen if there is no agreement in case of a fallout?
Very much. It's great to be here, a virtual person, but delighted to participate with these new means that we're all getting used to. First of all, I just want to say this week, actually, the fourth round of negotiations took place that has started since we reached the agreement on how to go forward this year. So that means that actually, despite the coronavirus crisis, discussions have not stopped. They were delayed a little bit, and of course, they've taken place by video conference rather than in person, but they have continued, and this is the fourth round that that has just started on the 2nd of June. We are ready to work hard with a constructive approach to these talks, and we believe that there is every possibility of progress. Indeed, we have made progress in quite a number of areas already, but it is going to require a change of approach on the side of the European Union if we're really going to move forward with the scale of ambition that we have on both sides. There are a number of problems, but I want to focus really on one. The European Union, the Commission negotiating team, is insisting on imposing conditions on the UK, the so-called level playing field, which would bind Britain into European laws and standards and impose European institutional control on UK legal regimes, almost as if we're quite left. Of course, that is inconsistent with what the decision of the British people was all about in the referendum in 2016, which was economic and political independence. So we need to see that shift in approach, in conception of what the future relationship is about on the European side if we really are going to make progress and reach the kind of agreement that will be beneficial for both sides. I think it's straightforward. We're looking for a suite of agreements, the core of which we trade on cooperation in air services, on fish, which is again one of the outstanding problems that will be discussed in the current round. All of this, all of our approach is based on precedent. It all exists in other free trade agreements that the European Union has with other countries. So we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for anything new. It's actually the European Union side that's asking something that is unprecedented and novel and essentially unbalanced. So that is where we are at the moment. But as I say, we're going into this round with a constructive attitude. and with every hope that with a bit more flexibility, we'll see a response from our friends on the negotiating team and from Michel Barnier. You asked what would happen if we don't reach agreement. Well, there will be probably a decision point later in June, later this month. This is the high-level meeting, which will decide if there is sufficient common ground to take forward the kind of agreement that was set out in the political declaration in October last year. So later in June, that discussion on both sides, see after that. But formally, institutionally and legally, what will happen is that the transition period ceases. So the UK will cease to behave and cease to be treated as a European Union member, which it is in many respects at the moment, even though we have formally left. And in trade terms, which is of course the core of the economic relationship, the UK will start to trade with the European Union and indeed with the rest of the world on World Trade Organization terms. And that means we will impose our own tariff regime. That has already been published. It's a competitive regime for an independent third country, but it does mean that tariffs will be imposed on our European Union partners if we can't reach a free trade agreement. And I'm sorry to say, an impact on Greek exporters to the UK as well. About, I think, 40% of Greek exports currently to the UK. If we don't reach a free trade agreement with the EU, we'll see tariffs imposed. So that is what will happen on January 1 next year if we don't reach agreement. But I want to stress again, we are hopeful and optimistic that with that shift in approach, we can get the sort of agreement that actually both sides were aiming at back in October when we reached agreement on the way forward.
So I understand there is a frustration that Brussels is trying to impose an institutional control over London. So let me ask Mr. Maude, what is your best case scenario for the future relationship between London and Brussels? Are there any possible implications that you are afraid of? What are, in your opinion, most serious differences between the two negotiating parts?
I think that Kate's talked about the differences and that they shouldn't be made light of. They are big differences, but at the end of it, there is a huge common interest in finding an answer. And as Kate said, I mean, you know, the UK is not looking for anything bespoke. In the first round of discussions, the transition discussions, following the referendum in 2016, the EU was always very clear that it wouldn't offer a bespoke arrangement. Well, now it is kind of insisting on a bespoke arrangement, whereas the UK wants a free trade agreement, a broad and generous one that will benefit both sides, something pretty much like the free trade agreement with Canada, between Canada and the EU. And it's hard to see that that would not be in both sides' interest. But obviously there are other issues as well. There's the issues around fisheries, there's the issues around cooperation, collaboration on intelligence and security, and those matters, and law and order, which again, there's a huge interest on both sides in that being reached. But it has to be seen holistically. We will remain a close friend, neighbor, partner of our friends in the European Union. I would be optimistic that there'll be a good outcome. I spent very much of my career in government doing EU negotiations. I was the British minister in the late 80s, negotiating the single market arrangements. In 1992, I was Minister for Europe. I did a lot of the preparation work for the Maastricht Treaty in the early 90s. And so, and then was most recently Trade Minister, was my last role in government before I made my departure in 2016. there is, I think, there's always a tendency for things to get left to the end. Of course, it's ambitious to get a full comprehensive agreement during the course of 2020, particularly with the constraints imposed by this wretched virus, which has made doing ordinary business so much harder. But as Kate says, the negotiations have continued. These are people who know each other pretty well and can deal with each other remotely in the way that we're doing this now. And I'd be optimistic that it comes out in a good place. It's in neither side's interest for this to end with a breach, because we need goodwill between neighbours and partners, and particularly on the issues like collaboration on intelligence matters. These are all based. These relationships don't have generally a formal underpinning, a legal underpinning. They're based on trust and goodwill and relationships. And so the kind of quality of the relationship that emerges from these discussions is going to be very important for how we live together in the world that follows.
So I underline that you are optimistic, and this is good. And you given as an example the Canada or Norway model in bilateral relations between the two parts. Mr. Ambassador, can I ask you, what are the British expectations on the bilateral relations between the United Kingdom and Greece, both in issues of higher political importance, such international cooperation, security, trade, or more practical issues like the Greek nationals living in the UK, or vice versa, British nationals living in Greece, etc.
Well, you've asked that. I'm very optimistic, actually. The ties are close to our two countries, so many ways. And every time I have a discussion with friends here and the Greek government, exactly the same feeling, is that we want to maintain as close as possible a relationship with the UK after we've exited completely the European Union structures. Just look at the debate that's going on in the moment about travel. This because of the incredibly close people-to-people links between our two countries. So over 3.5 million British tourists to Greece last year. There's a diaspora of Greeks in the UK of about probably around 100,000, 10,000 are students. That's the glue that knits our contemporary relations together. And I think the drivers for those, the kind of attractions of our two countries for each other, are not going to go away as a result of it. Some of the conditions between which those exchanges take place, the details may change, but the basic poles of attraction, I think, will remain. On a more official level, it's really interesting too to look at the Greek government's priorities, both pre and COVID crisis. Green transition, renewable energy, digitization of government, particularly in the sector, training, internationalizing education, and of course, migration and law enforcement, as Maude referred to. Now, we, even before the coronavirus crisis, we very full discussions with the Greek government about taking forward our cooperation on a bilateral level in those areas. And we're ready to do that. In fact, it's one of the reasons why we do not and we will not seek an extension or accept an extension to the transition period, because we want to get on with forging bilateral links. So there's no question of an extension to go back to the previous question. And in time, the problem. The problem at the moment is the approach in the under the kind of relationship that is possible. So hopeful and incredibly confident in the bilateral relationship. Let's just get on with it as soon as we've finished negotiating.
I see our time is quite limited, so let me ask Mr. Maude if the negotiations end up in a disruption, in an already disrupted economic environment, causing more difficulties in the relations of the United Kingdom with ex-EU partners. What impacts do you see in financial and political context? I mean, in a wider framework, is there any possibility of an institutionalized, let me say, rift between the two parts? And if this is something that will make Europe as a whole, as a continent, more weak against the United States, Russia, or China, or other international institutions?
Look, every government, every organization that brings together governments, they're all going to face a really tough time over the next few years. The effect of the COVID crisis on the economies in pretty much every country in the world is disastrous. I mean, every country is going to see a short, we hope a very short term, but very sharp recession. That's going to mean job losses for governments. That's going to mean a fiscal crunch. Governments are going to see their revenues falling and their expenditure rising sharply. My business, FMA, we work with other governments to help them to save money, and we provide advice on how to implement change that enables them to find a way through the short-term fiscal crunch, but also to find a way to grow the economy out of the crisis. So the only, I think, lesson I think there is from this is that the most disastrous thing when you're facing a recession, a downturn of this kind, is to double down on it by countries closing their borders and closing off their economies. Obviously, there are going to be constraints on travel. Those there have been, those are going to continue, but we hope they can be eased before too long. But for countries to seek to protect themselves and hunker down would be the worst possible solution. And so looking for arrangements which maximize the ability for different economies to interact, for flows to continue, for trade to continue and to grow. These are the ways for us to fight off the big threat, the dark threat of deep recession, potentially depression, and find a way through to the sunlit uplands that we hope will lie ahead.
So there is a long and a hard way to go. Our time is unfortunately up. Thank you very much, both of you, for your valuable comments. It was an honor for me to take part in this discussion. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.